Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Thank you to Rabbi Werber, to Cantor Rosen, to our music director Joyce Rosenzweig, Barbara Friedman, and the entire CBST chorus. So some of you in this room were actually at my younger daughter's bat mitzvah in 1999, which took place for this parsha. And I still think of what she taught that day in her Dvar Torah for this parsha. She focused on the very short phrase, Et achai anochi mevakesh. I'm searching for my brothers. When Joseph leaves his father and is sent out to look for the brothers, before the whole disaster happens where his brothers abduct him and then sell him to slavery in Egypt, he is in the fields and he approaches somebody and he says, I'm lost, basically. Et achai anochi mevakesh. I'm looking for my brothers. Obviously, in his case, he means it literally. But obviously, the sentence has a lot of resonance way beyond this particular story. But let's locate this story for a second. With this parsha, we begin something that's called the Joseph narratives. Every chapter from now until the end of the book of Genesis, meaning from chapter 37, where this parsha begins, to the end of the book, chapter 50, all of these chapters deal with the story of Joseph. So it's called the Joseph narrative because it is unique in the Bible, the story of one person all the way through. And he starts as a young boy, born, and then becomes a young teenager. And we watch him go through all the different phases of his life until the end of the book actually has his bones being taken up to Egypt. But that's for a parsha a few weeks from now. But this is a whole section. I've done this as a study group some years ago where we studied these chapters from 37 to 50 because they're such a uniquely discrete story that actually has it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which most things in the Bible are not so organized, or you can't lift them out in such a clear way and have a whole story the way that this Joseph narrative does. Which, of course, maybe that's one of the reasons we got that musical. There's a lot of good story. There's a lot of good details in this story. It has everything, right? It has a great outfit. We're also told by the commentaries that Joseph liked to put on eyeliner and eye makeup. So many, many years ago, and I think there are even some of you left from those days, I gave a whole drash where Joseph as a fairy tale. Get it? Fairy tale. Because there's certainly one way to read the whole Joseph story, that why was he hated by his macho field brothers? Maybe he was a sensitive, stay-at-home artist type who liked colorful outfits and makeup, and maybe that was the source of the tension with his brothers. Maybe that was the source. Or maybe he was an obnoxious teenager who, as the youngest and maybe clearly a favorite, was taunting his older brothers with the fact that they were less favored. Also a possibility. If we all know our family systems, that's not out of the question. And even though Joseph was right in the dreams that he had early in this parsha, and I'm not focusing on the dreams, so don't worry if you don't remember what these dreams are, the way he chose to tell his brothers about these dreams, which were accurate prophecies perhaps, was so obnoxious that you would want to beat this kid up also. It's like, it's not enough to be right. How you teach something that might be painful for people to hear is an important skill that Joseph really didn't have. So we watch a young man who doesn't fit in. Maybe he's gay, maybe he's not. He just likes that rainbow coat and makeup. And also, the other thing I mentioned then, maybe it wasn't such a big deal that he didn't sleep with Potiphar's wife. Maybe he didn't have to resist so hard, right? Maybe it wasn't such hard work. Okay, that's another drosh. I've just summarized it from many years ago, but you get the point. Et achai anochi mevakesh. I'm looking for my sibling, my brother. I'm looking for my soulmate. And in some ways, Joseph's story speaks to me very much today, not because of the dreams and of the launching of Jewish history, which Joseph's story obviously does. By his being sold into slavery, he starts the steps that get the Israelites sold into slavery and then ultimately redeemed. And guess what? Here we are, everybody. That's the entire history of the Jewish people in one sentence. But Joseph also is talking at this point, I think, about something very deeply current. Not only the jealousy and the obnoxious teenager, and not only the young person trying to fit in and struggling to find their path, but the loneliness that exists among, I think, everyone of trying to find our people. And this is what Molly taught in 1999. She said, we're all trying to find our people. You know, are you my people? Remember that kid's book, Are You My Mother? You know, are you my people? Where do I fit in? COVID decimated our worlds. We know that, where people's loneliness and isolation and their sense of disconnection was so strong, such a crisis in spiritual and emotional health. And now we have a situation in the world in which we live. We can apply this to everything. Where are our people? Where do we fit in? One of the things that has always struck me from my very first year at CBST, when I did the parlor sessions, which some of you remember, that Regina Linder and Michael Levine organized, and I did 2 a month for the first couple of years. And I would ask people to go around the room and tell me how they got to CBST. And 90% of the stories then were about the circuitous way of actually getting to CBST, who told them, how they got here. But how many people said, and I found my people here? How many people? So many different kinds of people. So many different backgrounds, Jewish backgrounds, queer backgrounds, so many different places of growing up. So many people have said that they have found their people here. I've often said that in study of religion, there are 3 things that people need in a synagogue that they search for, or a church. It's not only synagogue. And if you get 2 out of 3, you're lucky. You want to have a place where there's great music life and a prayer life. You want to have a place where you're intellectually challenged and you learn new things. And you want to have a place where you like the people you're sitting next to. Those 3 things are what people look for in religious communities. And usually you're lucky if you can get 2. My goal at CBST for these 32 years has been to create a community in which all 3 are firing on all, whatever that phrase is. Cylinders. Do they still have cylinders in cars? Okay, firing on, where you can come to CBST and find your people. It might be 1 person or 2 people. It doesn't mean that you like everybody. And I've always been against using language of family about CBST because guess what? The stories most of us tell about our families, we don't actually want to replicate. I'm much more into language of community, where you're with people you would not necessarily be with at your most intimate dinner party, or not necessarily your closest friends, but the power of community is to be exposed to people who are actually a little bit different than you, age-wise, gender-wise, gender expression, sexual orientation, socioeconomic. There are so many different ways that we can find differences that are worthy of teaching us something. But who are our people? Et achai anochi mevakesh. I have asked myself this question a lot these last 2 months. Who are my people right now? The loneliness that I have felt in trying to navigate the world since October 7th, intense, and we've talked about it some here. What is Hanukah, after all, right? The famous question is, my Hanukah, what is Hanukah? The only place that Hanukah appears in Jewish literature of the ancient times, not in the Bible at all. There's nothing biblical about Hanukah. There's a Megillah for Esther, for Purim, nothing about Hanukah in the Bible anywhere. In rabbinic literature, there is a small discussion, my Hanukah, that exists in the Talmud. What is Hanukah? As if they don't even know what it is. This is only a couple of hundred years after the historical events took place. And one rabbi asks another, what is Hanukah after all? And it's entirely in a section about lighting Shabbos candles. And so it's a gezerah shava, it's a way in the Talmud where if you say one word like, boots on Rafaela, I'll connect that to Napoleon's boots and start talking about the Napoleonic, conquest of Europe. That, in a nutshell, is what gezerah shava is. You take a word from one place, and it immediately gives you access to say anything you want as long as the same word exists. You think I'm joking? This is Talmud, people. Anyway, so the gezerah shava that takes place is that they're talking about Shabbos candles, and somebody says, oh yeah, but aren't there candles for Hanukah? I mean, that's how little understood. They start talking about, are there candles for Hanukah? Oh yes, what was the miracle? Oh yes, the whole thing that happened in the temple, blah, 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 blah. They said, oh yes, it's one paragraph, that's it, and it's done. And it doesn't discuss the military victory. Et achai anochi mevakesh. I'm looking for my people, right? So this year, I've been reading voraciously everything online about Hanukah because I was very intrigued how people are going to interpret Hanukah given the current events right now. And predictably, I didn't have to do any reading. I could have predicted it. There are those who are seeing Hanukah as an absolute proof that the military victory will happen because of God's miracle. The problem is the military victory in the Hanukah story is the small Maccabee group against the big. So it's hard to understand exactly what that is saying, except there's a sense that the military victory is taken and put at the top of the miracles we pray and we express gratitude for in Hanukah. That's nowhere in rabbinic literature. Nowhere is the focus on the military victory. So it wouldn't surprise you, I suppose, that those who are supporting the flattening of Gaza into a pancake are claiming that Hanukah is proof positive in our tradition to support that level of military victory. But it might surprise you a little bit that those on another position, those who are anti-Zionists, Jews, are claiming Hanukah also as their model and seeing Hanukah's story of being the story of victory over the military, not because of the military. So those are two groups that I don't feel very comfortable with. I'm not really comfortable. I don't find my place either in where the far left has come in its discussion of and description of the problem, nor of its description of the prescription to solve it. So I come back to where Hanukah has meant so much to me over the years. There was a piece on NPR yesterday, I think you might have heard it, where they had these two groups saying, what were they saying? Exactly what I said. Oh, Hanukah supports this military victory. Oh no, Hanukah supports my anti-Zionism. Two people, but the third person who spoke was Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. And I guess not so surprisingly, I agree with her. So, but isn't it interesting that all three of these groups can see Hanukah as a source of inspiration? Hanukah at its core, and the rabbis were uncomfortable with the military victory focus. Why? Because the Maccabees, who defeated the Greco-Syrians, they were Hellenistic Syrians. Why were the rabbis uncomfortable with that? What happened the day after the victory, so to speak? What happened immediately afterwards? The leadership who became the leaders of the Jewish people at that time were known as in Hebrew, the Hashmonaim, or the Hasmoneans in English, and they were completely corrupt, evil, and lasted, about 150 years as the leadership. So The question to ask about the Hanukah story is also what happens after. Didn't go very well for the Jews afterwards. And the story of what happens afterwards is a very painful one. And that, of course, then ends up with Jesus, because Jesus was fighting those people 150 years after the Hanukah story. But I digress. So where is the miracle of Hanukah? What is the Nes Gadol Hayasham? What is the great miracle that happened there? Was it the military one? Was it the fact that they found oil? You know the story that they found oil? I don't think that's what the miracle is. And I've said this before, and I hope this is one of the things that I can leave as a legacy. This is what the miracle of Hanukah is for me. Somebody walked into that temple. It was entirely destroyed. There had been pigs sacrificed to desecrate the temple. It was filthy. It had been used as a stable, all the horrific things to desecrate it, to humiliate a holy place. They found one little vial of oil. Most people would say, that's not enough. Let's just give up. It'll take 8 days to get oil from the oil-making company across the desert. So let's just not even try and wait 8 days until we get the new shipment of Amazon's oil for our Chanukah. I suspect most people said that. I suspect most people said, why bother? Look at the filth here. Why even try and light the menorah now? Let's just focus on making sure everything else is working. But some person whose name has not come down to us had the chutzpah to say, I don't know, we have enough for one day, let's try that. So the miracle wasn't the first night of Hanukkah, because they had enough oil for the first night of Hanukkah. The miracle was the 7 other nights of Hanukkah, that somebody whose name we do not know, and I think our tradition is deliberate about that. It could be anyone. It wasn't a Moses. It wasn't an elected fancy person. It wasn't socioeconomically a leader. It wasn't. We have no idea who it was. In other words, it could be any of us. One person decided not to let the despair and the horror of the moment freeze them into inaction. One person decided, you know what? I can't do everything, but I can do something. I can't produce 8 days of oil, but I can light the little bit I have and believe in the possibility that something else will happen. Too many people give up anticipating loss, anticipating failure, anticipating defeat, and we offer ourselves as a force for defeat and despair rather than doing whatever it is in our power to do to move things a little bit farther. So I think this miracle of lighting that one little light is at the center of what Hanukkah is trying to teach us. Do not give up. Do not give in. Do not believe that despair, although it might be realistic, isn't your only option. Don't be an empirical analyst of the situation only. How do you think Jews have survived for thousands of years and thousands of moments of anti-Semitism? There isn't a single country in Europe in which we were not slaughtered or expelled. Not a single one. India turns out to be the only country in which we were not slaughtered or expelled, and we lived 2,000 years very well with the Hindu majority population in India. 2,000 years from before the destruction of the temple, Jews lived in India. But in Europe, the bastion of Western civilization, there is not a single country which did not attack us, expel us, or kill us. So how did we survive? Not because we had a greater military power in Europe, obviously, and many individuals do not survive, but we believe in the commandment and the obligation to hope, not fake hope, not like, oh my God, I just hope, I get a raise next week. That you could hope for too, but I'm talking about a different kind of hope, and that we have in the Jews who left the Iberian Peninsula and wrote the words of Lecha Dodi, and we have it in the dying candle. I guess it's out of our candelabra over there, the menorah, that reminds us the miracle is any one of us can light that small candle. Just as the song Banu Choshech says, each one of us is a tiny little one. But where faith comes in is to believe that with multiple ones, we create a bigger and a greater light. Who are our people? Etachai Anochi Mevakesh. It doesn't have to be your best friends. It has to be a sense that you're about building a future. Where do I get my hope from? Not that I think things are going to work out so well in the immediate time, but I am very deeply moved by the depth of our Jewish tradition to believe that all of us are links in a chain that goes way beyond us. Goes way beyond us. It has nothing to do with whether or not you have biological or legal children. In Judaism, we believe anybody who supports the future of the Jewish people, it's as if their children, those are their children, whoever is in the future. So if we believe that what we're doing is creating a foundation for the future, I get a lot of hope for that. It means I'm thinking 50 years from now when people celebrate and change the little, Rabbi James is the one who's in charge of that. You're not going to be here then. But when that gets changed to 100 years, and that gets changed to 150 years, I want those people to look back on us, on me, on all of you, that we didn't give in to despair, that we held our values deeply to our souls, that we insisted on believing in a future that looks different than the world, the present in which we live right now. I want to read with you something that Lou Rittmaster offered on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of Irving Cooperberg. The candelabra that we use, Irving Cooperberg donated to CBST. It was his family's Chanukah. So every year when we light it, I think about him and the intense lights that he created that continue. So I'm going to read this from Lou. Around 1982, 83, 84, the same thing happened to us as happened to all of you. All of our friends started to die. First, our closest circle of friends, our contemporaries, started to disappear. We weren't going to be remote, so we got new friends, different friends. We took them as a second circle, and then they died, and we had to take a third circle. When Irving got sick around 1986, they said the virus was going to intensify, and the next step would be an iron lung. Either that, or he could be paralyzed for life, or it might reverse altogether. They didn't know. Just after we learned this news and were ready to really scream and yell, we found our friends. Etachai Anochi Mevakesh. We decided that if Irving lived, we were going to have a party. We thought that the party might be our last, that the Fire Island season would be our last. Then it was Passover, and maybe that one would be our last. And then we decided enough of this is our last. That's not the way you live your life. You gather your friends around you, and you get on with what you have to do. And that's what we've done. Irving was called back to the synagogue, and we got active again. Irving agreed to come back for 1 year as chairman if his strength allowed. I like to look at the way the rabbi, that was me, talked about Hanukah. The miracle was that there was only enough oil for 1 day. You lit the candle, and it's still going. Who knew? The miracle of Irving is that he lit the candle, and it's still going. Irving died many years ago, but his candle is still going. That's what all of us can do in this life. Now, of course, this was about AIDS, but it's about any crisis, right? How to gather your friends around, How do you create a place where you are surrounded by your people? To take that on as an activity to do, and to know that the miracle is that you light the candle and you trust it's going to keep going. Shabbat Shalom. And now we celebrate Hanukah.